We got blood spatter on the wall, 9mm casings.
You're presented with a puzzle.
Holy, it's another gun.
We didn't know at the time, but all the pieces were there.
You get these guys that just prey on people and end up killing them.
We did flash the money earlier.
Somebody is like, you know what this is, get on the ground.
Don't know nothing about nothing.
Those two witnesses, they're the two pillars that hold the case up.
But she was faced with a difficult choice, testify or not to testify against him.
Even though she was in love with him, knowing who the defense attorney was, I knew she was going to get beat up.
All he has to do is convince one juror, and you're in major trouble.
For those most affected by a homicide, the first 48 is just the beginning.
Sometimes my youngest son, he'll just start crying out of nowhere. And I'll be like, I miss him too.
This is the story of the fight for justice in the weeks, months, and years at a hotel on the east side of town.
What is your emergency?
Ma'am, there's been a shooting.
How many people have been shot?
One person been shot. Can y'all please come?
They're on the way there.
First responders find a young man shot 3 times. But doctors can't save him.
Well, I just got woken up by Sergeant Walker. Guess we're heading to a hotel over here.
I worked between 30 and 40 homicides in a 6-year time period.
If you want to work homicide, you just have to go with it. Murders don't happen on a 9-to-5 schedule.
I wouldn't hire a homicide detective if they didn't have a caring heart. So if you don't care, you're not going to get up at 1 o'clock in the morning and run for 25 hours and try to solve somebody's murder.
Hey, man, what's the deal?
Where a gentleman has rented the room for some sort of get-together. The victim is shot outside of the room.
Okay. What was his name?
Cedric.
27-year-old Cedric Gilmer worked as a customer service rep for a phone company. He was recently engaged and leaves behind 4 children.
We got witnesses in the room.
Officers on scene told me there was a party going on, so that's good for us because maybe somebody's going to tell us what happened.
We'll get them all downtown. All right.
When you first walk up, most of the time you're like, great, now what? And then stuff just starts developing. You're presented with a puzzle. We didn't know at the time, but all the pieces were there.
We got blood spatter on the wall up here, just next to the front door. 9mm casings.
I'm thinking there was an argument. And then the shooter took Cedric outside the room, and then Cedric got killed. If there's a confrontation, then there's a better chance for a solve, because then somebody's going to know somebody. It's not just a random act.
They were definitely having a party here.
Video right there.
We can just get the video downloaded.
Detective Ritter heads downtown to interview the witnesses from the party.
We need to know why it happened. If we get to the why, then the who will follow.
How'd you know to get there tonight?
Cedric invited me. He inboxed me on Facebook. I was like, oh no. And then my friend said she'd do my hair. And I was like, you know what? I'll go. I come in there, everybody was just kicking it.
Okay.
Then we heard somebody knocking at the door. And then the door opened. I hear somebody was like, you know what this is, get on the ground.
She says there were two men.
Tried to see one of the dudes, but he had like a black bandana on his face. Just tell everybody to put their phone on the table.
The suspects don't want them taking pictures, so that leads me to believe that this is not their first rodeo.
And what were they saying?
They just said, where it's at. Then Cedric was like, what do you need? And they was like, where the money at? And then Cedric was like, my money on 31st and something. They dragged him.
She says the two men forced Cedric outside.
I had my head down, but I hear everything. He kept getting smacked with the gun, and he started crying. I was just praying to myself. As soon as they left, just a minute ago, we heard the gunshots.
Okay. She seems pretty shook up. I'm definitely curious as to why this specific hotel room was chosen and why these suspects think that this victim has money.
Back at the hotel, the search for evidence continues.
I always like to tell officers on scene, we put up the tape, but that doesn't stop the crime scene. Look outside the tape. The suspects had to go somewhere, follow their path.
That found a couple handguns over here.
The officers initially find a .40 caliber and a .380. We had 9mm shells up at the crime scene. So that kind of is a head scratcher, because how many guns do you need to bring to a robbery? Holy
It's another gun.
It's a 9mm.
Ah, there it is. It has to be the murder weapon.
The guns are going to be sent to the lab and comparisons are going to be done to the cartridge casings.
And across the parking lot,
What is that?
3 cell phones, some cash, and a black bandana.
That is unbelievable. It's like a scavenger hunt.
It gives you a little bump of, okay, now we got somewhere to go.
4 hours in,
We interview another witness that was an associate / friend of Cedric.
Tell me how you knew how to go to this party.
Man, I know all them from the group called VIP. It's just like,
he says earlier that day, Cedric posted an image to the VIP Facebook page.
What's in the room that somebody wants to rob? Does Cedric have money?
when I pulled his pockets out, he didn't have no money. But he did flash some money earlier, though, in the group.
Really?
He says earlier that day, Cedric posted a photo of himself holding a handful of cash.
$16,000.
You know his guys that did the robbery?
He says one of the men had a white t-shirt and the other wore a black hoodie.
I need you to show us that VIP page, okay?
All the money.
And there's an image of Cedric spreading a wad of cash out, kind of flaunting it.
Now we have a motive.
Looks like someone's posted a video of the party a couple of hours ago. And there's a female witness.
And there's Cedric right there sitting on the bed.
I'm automatically thinking that somebody saw this victim flashing this amount of cash on Facebook and they figured out that he was at this hotel.
They decided to try and rob somebody and end up killing them.
Six hours in,
Sarge, right here.
Those cell phones that were taken from the scene, there's a pretty good chance it's going to tell us a story of what happened.
I'm out here. Is the money there?
We still getting this money?
Somebody set them up to be robbed. Those text messages are telling us that there's somebody in there giving intelligence information to the group outside that's going to come in. So we need to identify whose cell phones they are.
I'm doing my hair. She was talking about doing her hair in there in the interview.
And then my friend said she'd do my hair.
We believe that that's her phone. If that's true, that information absolutely changes the whole focus. She is now a co-conspirator.
Is this phone yours?
We need the lady at the party to do the right thing and come clean with who she's actually communicating with.
I'm going to give you a chance right now to get out in front of this.
We're not going to play with you. You get one chance at this. One chance and one chance only.
This is a picture of him. He thought he was really cool. He likes to get his beard designed and stuff. He was just so full of joy.
How's this last year been for you?
Pretty rough. I really miss him very much. And I get to see him another day.
Eight hours into the investigation.
I think you set it up.
I didn't set up anyone.
Okay, I'll read the messages. You can be on your way now, you tell them. I'm out here, that's them talking to you. I see it, is the money there? Oh, you can't have a phone. I mean, you're talking about setting this whole thing up. It's obvious.
She holds the information we need. We're looking to advance the ball.
If you lie to us, you're going to more than likely get charged, just like everybody else. There's two guys that did the robbery, but we got to know who those people are.
At a certain point, you need to think about you and what's the best thing to do.
Tell me what Quincy tells you.
He said, I need you to go to that party and check out the scenery for me. You see if I see anything.
If you see anything or if you see any money?
If I see any money.
Okay. Fantastic. We've got one of our guys that we're going to really start looking hard into.
She tells us she's on the phone with Quincy while she's at the party.
I said, this is not a good idea. Whatever y'all trying to do, this man, he's a cool dude. He got mad at me. After that, we wasn't talking.
Okay. Who was Quincy with?
I don't know who that dude was.
All right, I'm going to give you a few minutes to sit here and think about anything else that you haven't told me, okay? You got to come 100% clean or it's not going to work. Well, it's getting better.
Did she come out and say it was first name, middle name, last name? No, but all we needed was enough to where we could start researching.
Her text messages give us a phone number that leads us to the suspect.
Roger Whiteside.
Known as Raj Quincy. He has prior convictions for firearm possession and driving under suspension. He is 25.
Okay, who's that?
See?
Now she is helping us, and that's all we're asking for.
Does Quincy have access to this VIP page? Where's Quincy live?
I don't know. I didn't know they was gonna shoot the man.
We let the woman go. We think she knows more, but right now we'll let that go for the time being. It's a good start, but we don't have the identity of the second suspect.
12 hours in, while the warrant squad searches for Roderick at his known hangouts.
There's your video. We have video evidence that basically shows the hotel stairwell area.
That's Cedric, man.
Ten minutes before the shooting.
It could be them.
White shirt, not a hoodie. The guy in the white shirt. White side.
Look at that. That's him.
He's got a bandana around his neck. He's trying to figure out this second guy.
Having video of the two suspects going up the stairs to the murder scene, that's great evidence right there.
This must be when Cedric gets shot.
Here we go. Back it up. Freeze it. See the gun?
Yeah.
Putting something in his pants. Both of them had guns.
Holy dude.
The suspect wearing the black hoodie places an item under this particular bush. That's where we recover that 9mm.
That's going to lead us to say the suspect in the black hoodie is the shooter, because they were not going to switch guns. This is before the shooting. They back in, and then they pop the hood. We know from experience that criminals will carry the guns in the hood of their car because if they get pulled over by the police, we will not usually search the engine compartment.
They're getting out right now.
Oh.
As we watch, we get a third person emerging from the back seat.
Everybody says only two went in.
We need to find out who that person is.
Try those other camera views. Here's number 3.
Number 3 doesn't go up.
That guy's a lookout.
So now we've got a third suspect.
He's jumping the fence. He's getting the hell out of there. He didn't want to be a part of it.
The third man at the scene, he does kind of take off. So he was not as complicit.
We need to figure out who he is. I think that he's the most likely guy to talk.
At this point, we're still investigating Roderick, looking for phone numbers for him, see who he's communicating with on the night the incident takes place. We have the probable cause to arrest him, but we need to know where he is.
There's always the empathy towards the victim's family, and they want to hear it. A suspect was arrested.
We're homicide unit. Ronnie?
Ronnie?
John.
Detectives Brown and Leatherman update Cedric's family on the investigation.
Question. Y'all got anybody in custody?
They have some names that we're looking for, but nobody's officially been arrested yet.
Man, this is a whole bunch of going on.
What I gathered from talking to Cedric's family, associates, friends, was he was just a very open, trusting, friendly guy that liked to socialize. He had gotten some sort of settlement check and just made that fatal mistake of showing that money on Facebook. And then you have a couple of guys that are basically predators that develop this plan.
You know, it hurts. We as people don't want to deliver that news, but that's one thing which kind of bonds us to the family because we care.
Hopefully we get some answers.
Yeah. We'll be hollering at you
Somebody's gonna
soon.
have to say something.
36 hours in,
We don't have a name of the second guy yet, but we're still in contact with the lady at the party. What's going on, girl? Did Roderick try and contact you?
No, sir.
Do you have any idea where he would be?
No, sir.
Okay.
Well, I wanted to tell you about the second guy that was there. So good.
She was able to develop a nickname for suspect number 2.
she says she now suspects a man Roderick once introduced her to.
He was just like so crazy. I remember he was tall, like big something, like a skinny face.
She's doing the right thing. That's a good feeling. I'll be in touch, okay?
Okay.
All right, hang in there.
So, Hood. There he is.
Dude, I think that is him.
I'm gonna go look up Sohood.
Okay.
Claude Calvin, huh?
Claude Calvin has 9 prior convictions, including burglary. He's 23 years old.
Judging by where the gun's found, Claude is going to be the shooter.
We're thinking Claude Calvin is the person that had on the black hoodie that placed the item under the bush that turned out to be the 9mm.
We're gonna get his phone records and we'll compare them to Whiteside's, see if they were together that night.
As the first 48 winds down,
We're now chasing somebody, not just an enigma, not a grainy picture on a video. That's a good feeling. Those two brought guns to the party.
But we still had work to do as far as verifying exactly who the third man at the scene was.
1 week later,
Hello? We got a tip.
It's good stuff.
the caller provides a possible name.
Somebody anonymously calling in saying, the third person at the scene is this person. And that's why Crime Stoppers is invaluable to us.
What do you think?
6 foot 280. He's a big dude.
That guy's big.
He's spitting an image of the guy on video.
Yeah.
We need to run his phone too to see if he was with Claude and Whiteside.
So we end up naming suspect number 3.
They're out there somewhere. So it's the whole team effort to get after and find the shooters.
12 days later,
New at noon, one of Tulsa police's most wanted suspects is now behind bars.
another tip now leads law enforcement to Roderick.
The U.S. Marshals in Chicago arrested this man, Roderick Whiteside.
Authorities in Chicago ended up searching the residence and finding him hiding under a mattress.
Who's with him at the apartment where he's found is a surprise to Tulsa PD.
The woman at the party, she is intimately involved with him.
We knew that the woman at the party had relatives in Chicago, so somebody saw this Facebook post, and Roderick was there with her.
Roderick gets found in Chicago, and we wait for the sheriff's office to bring them back to Tulsa.
They're both going to get charged with the same charge, murder. I felt probably a little bit betrayed by her. Behind our back, she's hiding him out in Chicago. Do we trust her? No. Does she get arrested at that point? Yeah.
1 week later, the cell phone records are in for all 3 of the men.
Let's see. At midnight 30. Oh yeah, there he is.
At the time of the murder, all 3 of their cell phones are hitting a tower in very close proximity to the scene.
If you're involved, we're going to arrest you. There's 2 suspects that we got to find before they can do this again.
Calls, please!
Finally, at his girlfriend's apartment, warrants officers find the 3rd man.
He's been real quiet on the way here.
He's just quiet, huh?
The interview with the 3rd man, the stakes are pretty high. We need him to say, yeah, I was there with Claude and Roderick, and they were planning to do this.
I mean, I know you know what this is about.
Don't know nothing about nothing that's going on right now.
So it's very important that he comes clean and tells the truth and confirms what we believe.
You want to go to prison for these 2 guys, or you want to tell me what happened?
I've got your phone records. They all show that you were at the scene before it was committed. You're on video.
This is crazy, man.
The risk of being confrontational is they clam up and just don't talk. But maybe it's time to push a little harder.
The guy that's throwing a freaking kickback party just wants to socialize, gets dragged out of his hotel room, gets shot and murdered there. You, on the other hand, leave before that happens. So you have an opportunity to help yourself.
I want you to tell me the truth for you. 1, because it's the right thing to do, and 2, it's the best thing for you. Because right now, all I can go is on the evidence that I have.
Do you really want this to go over to the DA's office with your statement to us and say, I wasn't there?
Well, what could you do to help me?
I can tell the district attorney, hey, this is what he knows.
I actually get a text from Ritter. It was a little unusual, just, hey, I need you to come over here right now.
I don't know if this will make you feel better. Look at me. And he's going to come over here and sit down with us.
This was certainly the first time I've ever been asked to come over contemporaneously and participate in an interview, and it's never happened since.
I was like, yeah, swing the bat, see what happens.
All right, but he's a district attorney, okay?
Just so you know, there's my Tulsa County badge, Eric Graylis, district attorney.
The case gets much more difficult without the 3rd man at the scene cooperating. But if the trust is then there, he won't talk. But what he needed to hear from the mouth of a prosecutor is, we'll listen to you.
I know,
But what I think you want to do, as I see you sitting there, is that you want to come clean.
Still stuck on murder, though.
We filed the charge as murder. We take into account every single statement that everybody makes when we make our ultimate decision. We can't make promises. But what they can promise you is that telling the truth is the only way is the best way out of any of this.
He told me, dude, he like, man, this got some type of check for $16,000. He said he just started his little VIP party.
He says Roderick asked him if he wanted to go and meet some girls.
I never known about no type of robbery. So they come. I jumped in the car with him. And I saw this dumb black ass put this ass on it. Get out the car. He got the gun, I think, from under the hood.
He says Roderick told him to follow him and Claude Calvin up to the party.
You know, I'm like, bro, I ain't with this, bro.
Because they were trying to talk you into it and you were telling them no.
I live, man.
I think he wanted to get it off his chest. I think he kind of got sucked into this without full knowledge about what was going to happen.
Yeah, I heard screams as I'm walking through this parking lot. Then I heard a boom, boom. I ran, and that's when he got...
He says soon after the shooting, he got a call.
That's what Roger told me, but they went there to do and what happened. He said this dumbass popped.
He's confirming that Claude Calvin is the shooter.
You don't know where Claude is?
No, man. I just didn't know what the plan was going into it.
You did the right thing.
He's gonna look over everything that you told us. All right, hang on just a second. And that worked. Man, I think he's telling the truth. Just having Eric build that rapport, I think it went a long way towards him showing my sincerity. If you tell me the truth, I'll tell the DA's office that you're telling the truth. For now, he's gonna be taken to jail. Him cooperating is, the smartest decision he's made at this point.
But we're still working it. There's still that little thing in the back of our head saying, Claude Calvin is the shooter. We gotta go find him.
We're still going to have to bring in Claude. When you're looking for somebody, you're going to look into their associates, family members, on down the line.
7 weeks since Cedric's shooting.
Claude was found in Oklahoma City. Obviously, we'd love a confession, but I was 99% sure that he was going to lawyer up.
You don't know nothing about nothing?
I hired my lawyer. I ain't got nothing to say.
And that's what happened.
1 week later.
Both the woman witness at the party and Roderick were extradited back to Tulsa from Chicago.
They're transferred to Tulsa County Jail.
I think Claude Calvin pulled the trigger, so if Roderick's smart, he'll talk to me. All right, man. Did you say you want to have a lawyer with you when you talk?
Rather have him with me while I answer you guys' questions.
All right. Hang tight.
Roderick and Claude have clammed up, so now we have to put the story together. And those witnesses are crucial to that story, especially the woman at the party. The next step is quite simple. We hand our reports over to the prosecutor, the district attorney's office.
Claude Calvin and Roderick Whiteside were charged with felony murder first degree. That's the first time I start stepping in and start working that case as a prosecutor. Detective Ritter had put together a pretty good case from the outset. He'd been able to talk to people who were there at the scene, and the first thing we had to do to prepare for trial was to go ahead and have a conversation with the woman at the party. She was faced with a difficult choice: testify or not to testify, regardless of what the possible outcome might be.
I was the defense attorney for the woman at the party. She was a mess. She had never been in trouble before. She had never been arrested before. She needed to be cooperative with the state of Oklahoma and testify against Roderick, even though she did love him.
There was some concern on my part about how the woman at the party would do testifying against Roderick Whiteside.
Maybe there could be some issues where she could lie against Claude in order to save Roderick. And that's where the third man at the scene has to come in. They're the two pillars that hold the case up. If either one of them is proved to be a liar, you probably don't win your case. And the district attorneys are in major trouble.
But they were both a little bit concerned about the consequences of testifying.
As ADA Kevin Gray prepares his case,
The woman at the party and the third man at the scene, their charges were dismissed without prejudice. which allow us to file them again if we needed to. We make very clear that this was kind of the moment of truth for them as a witness. Take the stand, do the right thing. So we got him set for trial.
Claude will be tried before Roderick.
First up was the woman at the party.
The morning that she testified, she was very nervous, but she gave her version of what happened.
The woman at the party puts a weapon in Claude's hands.
But knowing who Claude's defense attorney was, I knew she was going to get beat up.
She admitted on the stand that she had lied to police.
I seen the gun in my face, so I just turned away.
She's pretty clearly trying to be a little bit evasive with Detective Ritter about who she knew and how she recognized them, pretending like she didn't. She knew exactly who was there with the guns.
I was following the case. She continually says, I lied, I lied, I lied, I lied. That's difficult for a jury to get over. If she lied that many times to the police, why can we trust her now? She would say or do anything in order to keep herself out of trouble or potentially to keep Roderick out of trouble. That's what Prosecutor Gray had to overcome in this case.
Claude's defense attorney is trying to make the jury believe that the testimony she provided was what the state of Oklahoma wanted her to say.
All he has to do is convince one juror, and he is shown all of the reasons why she might lie for Roderick. He's suggesting Claude is the victim of this, that the state does not have evidence to convict him.
Going to the motel, it's the scene of the crime. The interesting thing is what we saw happened, what the third man at the scene was thinking that night. You can see the window. That's the balcony window. Cedric was killed right outside. The third man at the scene has two choices: to leave and abandon the crime, or continue on with it and become a part of it. This is where he made his escape. He decided he wasn't going to risk anything for these two guys. And that's going to be brought to bear at the trial. I'm hoping that this third man, because he didn't want to be a part of this, is a good enough man to tell the story of what happened. And we're going to need him at trial.
As Claude Calvin's murder trial continues,
Prosecutor Gray needs the third man to come in to corroborate the woman at the party. If the jury thinks she's lying for Roderick against Claude, your case is probably in the tank. And one of the best ways to corroborate someone's testimony is to show them a video. Videos don't lie.
For the jury, it was the first time they had a chance to see that video. And it wasn't just a detective saying, hey, here's the video we found. We actually had somebody who was in that video narrating it.
Prosecutor Gray has him identify himself, has him identify Roderick, and then most importantly, has him identify Claude.
When the third man at the scene walked away, I'm sure Whiteside and Calvin probably felt like it was a betrayal, but I have always thought that took a whole lot of strength and a whole lot of character. Once the third man at the scene got off the stand, we had essentially told our story. But if I put those two witnesses on and arrested, we were toast because of the issues of credibility. So it becomes the prosecutor's task to corroborate what they've said.
The last person that was called was one of the lab guys that does the ballistic stuff, and he was able to test cartridge casings that are found on the landing area where the murder's committed. They all come back to being fired from that pistol that we recovered that we watched Claude put underneath the bush on video.
Both sides rest their case.
In my closing argument, I focused very strictly on the evidence as presented, but I knew that the defense was going to make the argument that it could have been Roderick Whiteside. Anytime a jury goes out to deliberate, I'm never sure of the verdict. Any prosecutor who tells you otherwise is lying. Juries are funny creatures, and sometimes they can do funny things. And so I was nervous about what they're going to do.
8 hours later,
the jury came back with a verdict of guilty.
But we haven't won yet. He's only half of the people that were there.
Mr. Whiteside had had the opportunity to see how Claude Calvin's trial had gone, and I think for him, the writing was on the wall. I'm usually not much of a horse trader, but once Mr. Whiteside's attorney and I came to an agreement, that seemed like justice to me. I don't think Roderick Whiteside or Claude Calvin went there that day expecting to kill Cedric Gilmer. I think what they went to do was to get rich quick, but they went there and killed Cedric. And so I thought it was justice for them to pay for it.
Cedric didn't ask to be robbed. He didn't ask to be shot and killed. Cedric's family didn't ask for him to be taken away.
This was his very last picture before he died.
Sometimes my youngest son, he'll just start crying out of nowhere. And then he'll just point to that picture. And I'll be like, I miss him too.
The first clue was sitting in a box nobody had opened in more than 30 years. Not hidden underground. Not locked inside a safe. Not buried beneath an abandoned building. Just a thin evidence envelope, yellowed with age, sitting inside an old Pittsburgh police storage box. For decades, investigators had believed they knew everything important about the disappearance of 19-year-old college student Claire Donovan. They were wrong. Claire had vanished in Pittsburgh in the autumn of 1982. She was young. She was bright. She was ordinary in the way people often describe victims only after something terrible happened. She attended college. She worked part-time. She had friends. She had plans. She had a small apartment near campus and a habit of calling her mother almost every evening. Then, one night, the phone stopped ringing. Claire had been seen leaving campus shortly after 9. A friend remembered her carrying a canvas bag filled with books. Another student remembered seeing her near a bus stop. A third witness remembered a dark vehicle parked across the street. Then nothing. By the following morning, Claire's apartment was still locked. Her books were inside. Her purse was missing. Her bed had not been slept in. And Claire was gone. The first hours became a frantic search. Friends walked through neighborhoods. Police checked hospitals. Her photograph was distributed. Her family called everyone they could think of. There was no message. No obvious struggle. No confirmed sighting after that night. The case became a missing person investigation almost instantly. But within days, detectives began to suspect something darker. Claire had not simply disappeared. Someone had made an effort to erase her trail. Her personal routine had suddenly stopped. Her bank account was untouched. Her classes were missed. Her friends received no explanation. And the one person who claimed to know where Claire had gone could not give police a consistent story. His name was Michael Trent. Michael was 22. He was another student. He knew Claire. They had studied together. They had attended parties with the same group. Several friends described them as close. Not officially a couple, but close enough that investigators immediately wanted to know what their relationship had been. Michael said Claire had been upset that evening. He claimed she told him she wanted to leave Pittsburgh for a few days. He said she was thinking about visiting a relative. But Claire's mother said there was no such plan. No trip had been arranged. No bus ticket had been purchased. No suitcase had been packed. The story made little sense. Detectives questioned Michael again. This time, he said Claire had mentioned meeting someone. Who? He did not know. Where? He could not remember. Why? He said Claire had not explained. The investigators were frustrated. The city was already beginning to talk. A college student had vanished. Her photograph appeared on flyers. Her classmates searched parks and alleyways. Parents warned their daughters not to walk alone. The case became one of those stories that changes the atmosphere of a city. Every parked car looked suspicious. Every stranger became a possible suspect. Every unanswered telephone call carried a new fear. Then Claire's car was found. It was parked several miles from campus. The doors were locked. The windows were closed. There was no visible damage. Inside were several books, a jacket, a half-empty bottle of water, and something investigators considered insignificant, a small receipt. It came from a convenience store. The time printed on it was 9:47 p.m. Claire had disappeared sometime around that period. The receipt suggested she had been near the store shortly before vanishing. The clerk remembered her. He remembered a young woman buying a drink. He also remembered someone waiting outside, a man. The clerk could not identify him, but he remembered the vehicle. Dark blue, older model. One rear light appeared damaged. That detail went into the report. Then it disappeared into the case file. The investigation continued. Police searched nearby streets. They checked abandoned buildings. They questioned students. They searched wooded areas outside the city. Nothing. Weeks passed. Then, months. Claire's family refused to accept that she was simply gone. Her mother kept her bedroom unchanged. Her father contacted investigators repeatedly. Friends continued searching. But the case slowly began to lose momentum. There was no body, no confession, no weapon, no reliable suspect, and no clear motive. Michael remained under suspicion, but investigators could never establish that he had harmed Claire. His story changed several times. That was troubling. But changing a story was not enough to prove murder. He passed a polygraph examination. The result did not solve anything. The case stalled. Years passed. Claire's classmates graduated. Her friends married. People moved away. The neighborhood changed. Buildings disappeared. New buildings replaced them. The bus routes changed. The convenience store closed. The original investigators retired. Claire's name slowly became a memory, but her family never stopped searching. Every few years, they contacted police. Every few years, they asked whether the case had been reviewed. The answer was usually the same. There was no new evidence. Then, decades later, a retired detective donated old case materials to a departmental archive. Boxes were opened. Files were cataloged. Evidence numbers were checked. Some materials were transferred into digital databases. That was when someone noticed Claire's case. The file had been marked inactive, but the evidence log showed something unusual. An item collected from Claire's car had never been fully analyzed. The item was a small piece of fabric. Investigators in 1982 had considered it insignificant. It had been recovered from the rear floorboard. No blood. No obvious stain. No visible connection to Claire. It was placed into an envelope and stored, then forgotten. Modern investigators decided to examine it. The laboratory processed the material carefully. The sample was old. Very old. But technology had changed. A biological trace was discovered. The laboratory extracted a partial DNA profile. There was no immediate match, but the profile was usable. That alone changed the case. For 30 years, detectives had been asking who might have seen Claire. Now they could ask a different question. Who had left biological material inside her car? The profile was compared against available databases. Nothing. Investigators widened the search. Still nothing. Then they examined Claire's circle again. Michael Trent. Her classmates. Her coworkers. Neighbors. Former acquaintances. Anyone who might have had legitimate access to her car. Michael provided a reference sample. It was not a match. That eliminated one of the oldest theories. The detectives were forced to look elsewhere. They returned to the original witnesses. One witness had mentioned a dark blue vehicle. Another remembered seeing Claire talking to a man. A third remembered a vehicle parked near her apartment. The descriptions were incomplete. But when investigators placed them together, they began to notice a pattern. The dark blue vehicle had been seen more than once. It was not necessarily the same car, but the descriptions were strikingly similar. Older model, dark paint, damaged rear light. The investigators searched historical registration record. They found dozens. Most were irrelevant. One was not. A dark blue sedan registered to a man named Edward Kane. Kane had been 26 in 1982. He had lived only a few miles from Claire's campus. He worked at a small printing company, and he had no obvious connection to Claire, at least none that appeared in the original investigation. Detectives checked his background. He had never been charged with a violent crime. He had never been identified as a suspect. He had never been interviewed about Claire, but his vehicle matched the description. Investigators searched old photographs. They found the sedan. The rear light was damaged. The match was not perfect, but it was close enough to demand another look. Then they discovered something even more troubling. Edward Kane had known Michael Trent. Not casually. They had worked together at the printing company during the summer before Claire disappeared. Michael had never mentioned him. That omission suddenly became important. Investigators interviewed Michael again. He was much older now. He had spent decades living away from Pittsburgh. When detectives asked about Edward Kane, Michael became quiet. Then he said he barely remembered him. The investigators showed him an old photograph. Michael stared at it. He recognized Kane immediately. He admitted they had been friends. Why had he never mentioned him? Michael said there was no reason. Detectives disagreed. There was now a reason. Kane owned a vehicle matching the witness description. He knew Michael. He lived near Claire, and biological material had been found inside Claire's car. But investigators still needed to connect Kane to Claire. They searched old college records. Nothing. Employment records. Nothing. Telephone records. Incomplete. Then a forgotten document surfaced. A student newspaper from 1982. One small article mentioned a campus fundraising event. Claire had volunteered. The article included a photograph. In the background was a man standing beside a printing company table. Edward Kane. The photograph proved only that Kane had been on campus, but the date was significant. It was 3 days before Claire disappeared. Investigators enlarged the image. Claire was visible near the edge of the frame. Kane was looking in her direction. It could have meant nothing. But now investigators had a reason to ask whether the two had known each other. The answer came from someone unexpected. Claire's former roommate. She remembered Kane. She said Claire had once mentioned him. Not by name. She had described him as the man from the print shop. According to the roommate, Claire had complained that someone had been asking questions about her. At the time, the roommate assumed Claire was talking about Michael. Now she was not sure. The investigators asked whether Claire had ever seemed afraid. The roommate said yes. Only once. A few days before Claire vanished. Claire had told her that someone had followed her after class. She had looked behind her repeatedly. She had checked the street before entering the apartment. The roommate remembered asking who was following her. Claire had said she did not know. Then she had added something else. She said the man drove a dark blue car. The investigators now had a connection. The vehicle, the witness, the photograph, the former roommate, and the biological evidence. The cold case was moving again. But one problem remained. Edward Kane had been dead for 12 years. He could not be interviewed. He could not explain his movements. He could not provide an alibi. He could not answer why his car had been seen near Claire. And he could not explain why his former friend, Michael Trent, had never mentioned him. The investigation had reached a new stage. Detectives could no longer arrest the man they suspected. They needed to determine whether Kane had acted alone. And if he had not, who had helped him? That question brought Michael Trent back into the center of the case. Because the more investigators examined the forgotten evidence, the clearer one fact became. Michael had not simply known Claire. He had known Edward Kane. And somewhere between those two men was the secret that had kept Claire Donovan's case buried for decades. The discovery of Edward Kane's name changed the direction of the investigation, but it did not answer the question that had haunted Claire Donovan's family for decades. Who had seen her last? The answer was still buried somewhere between the final hours of October 1982 and the first morning when her absence became impossible to ignore. Detectives began rebuilding those hours minute by minute. Not year by year. Not theory by theory. Minute by minute. At 8:30 that evening, Claire was still on campus. At 9:05, a classmate remembered seeing her near the library. At 9:31, Claire stopped at the convenience store. At 9:47, the receipt was printed. After that, the timeline became uncertain. That gap was where the case lived. That gap was where investigators believed the truth had been hiding. The original detectives had worked with limited technology. No cell phone records. No modern surveillance systems. No computerized databases. No advanced DNA testing. Most of their evidence came from interviews, handwritten reports, photographs, and whatever physical evidence could be collected at the time. They had done what they could. But 40 years later, investigators could ask different questions. They could connect records that had once existed separately. They could search names across databases. They could enhance photographs. They could extract DNA from material that had once been considered useless. And they could revisit witnesses with details that had not been available in 1982. That was exactly what they did with Claire's former roommate. Her name was Susan Miller. In 1982, Susan had been 21. She and Claire had shared an apartment for less than a year. Susan remembered Claire's routines better than almost anyone. She knew when Claire studied. She knew where Claire ate. She knew which bus she took. She knew that Claire hated walking alone after dark. And she remembered the final week. Claire had changed. Not dramatically. Not enough to make anyone call the police, but enough to make a close friend notice. Claire began checking the window before leaving the apartment. She started taking different routes to campus. She stopped mentioning certain people. And once, according to Susan, she came home visibly shaken. Susan asked what happened. Claire said someone had been following her. Susan assumed she meant Michael. Claire corrected her. No. That was the word Susan remembered. No. Not Michael. Someone else. Susan asked who. Claire would not say. Then she looked through the window. A dark blue sedan was parked across the street. Susan remembered the car because of its damaged rear light. Claire stared at it for several seconds. Then she said something Susan never forgot. He wants me to know he can find me. That sentence had never appeared in the original police report. Susan had not told investigators. Why? She said she was afraid. She believed the police would think she was exaggerating. She was young. Claire was missing. Everything felt unreal. She also believed the car might belong to someone Claire knew. Susan did not want to interfere. That decision stayed with her for decades. Now she was finally telling detectives. Investigators asked whether she recognized Edward Kane. Susan said she did not. They showed her the old photograph. She studied it. Then she shook her head. No, that's not the man. The detectives stopped. If Susan was right, the case had just changed again. They asked her to describe the man she remembered. She said he was taller than Kane, dark hair, thin face, usually wearing a jacket. She could not remember his age, as she remembered the vehicle. Dark blue, damaged rear light. The same vehicle description remained. The man was different. The car was not. Investigators now wondered whether Kane had loaned his car to someone. That possibility had always existed, but now it became central. They searched the vehicle's history. The sedan had been registered to Kane, but the insurance records listed another authorized driver, Michael Trent. The same Michael who had known Claire. The same Michael who had known Kane. The same Michael who had never mentioned Kane during the original investigation. The investigators returned to him. Michael was now in his 60s. He had a family, a career, a quiet life. He had spent decades believing the case was finished. When detectives showed him the insurance document, he denied remembering it. They showed him his signature. He said it might be his. They showed him the vehicle. He said he had driven it once, then twice, then several times. The story changed again. The detectives asked whether he had driven the car on the night Claire disappeared. Michael said no. They asked whether he had ever given Claire a ride in it. He said no. They asked whether Kane had ever discussed Claire. Michael said no. Then detectives placed the DNA report on the table. They did not tell him whose DNA it was. They simply explained that biological material had been recovered from Claire's car. Michael looked at the report. His face changed. He asked whether the DNA belonged to Kane. The investigators did not answer. That question was important. They had never mentioned Kane's DNA. They had only said there was biological evidence. Michael had connected Kane to it himself. The detectives asked why. Michael said Kane had a habit of borrowing cars. He said there was nothing unusual about it. But investigators now knew something else. The biological profile was not Kane's. Kane had died before modern testing could be performed, but his family could potentially provide a comparison. A relative was located. The DNA did not match closely enough to establish that Kane had left the material. The theory weakened, but not completely, because there was another possibility. The DNA could belong to Michael. A reference sample was obtained. The result was negative. Michael was excluded. The detectives now had a strange situation. The two men most strongly connected to the vehicle were not the source of the biological material. So who was? The laboratory re-examined the profile. The sample contained enough information for additional genealogical analysis. Investigators began mapping possible relatives. The process was slow. The profile was incomplete. The database was limited. But eventually, one family line appeared. The biological contributor was likely related to a man named Raymond Pike. Raymond had worked at the same printing company. He had been 28 in 1982. He had known Kane. He had known Michael. And according to payroll records, he had worked the late shift on the night Claire disappeared. The detectives searched for him. Raymond was alive. He lived outside Pennsylvania. When investigators contacted him, he agreed to speak. At first, he denied remembering Claire. Then investigators showed him a photograph. He immediately recognized her. That was another contradiction. Why had he claimed not to remember her? Raymond said he had seen her at the printing company. That was true. The company had printed materials for the college. Claire had occasionally visited. But then he admitted something more. He said Claire had asked him for help. She had wanted copies made. Documents. Not schoolwork. Financial documents. Investigators asked what kind. Raymond said he did not know. He remembered that Claire was nervous. She had told him she needed the copies because she believed someone was stealing money. The detectives asked whether she had mentioned Kane. Raymond said yes. She had mentioned him. She had also mentioned Michael. And she had mentioned Richard Hale. 3 names investigators were already examining. The case was suddenly wider than anyone expected. Claire may have been investigating financial wrongdoing. She may have discovered something inside the company. And she may have trusted people connected to that company to help her. But someone had apparently been watching her. The detectives asked Raymond whether he had seen her on the night she disappeared. He hesitated. Then he said yes. That answer sent the investigation into overdrive. Raymond claimed Claire had come to the printing company shortly after 9. He said she was carrying a canvas bag, the same type of bag described by her classmates. He said she wanted copies of several pages. She seemed frightened. He asked what was wrong. She said she had made a mistake. He asked what kind. She refused to explain. Then a car arrived. Dark blue. Damaged rear light. Raymond said Claire saw it through the window. She stopped talking. She looked terrified. Then she told Raymond she had to leave. He asked whether she wanted him to call police. She said no. She said police could not help. Then she walked outside. Raymond watched from the doorway. The dark sedan pulled away. Claire followed. The detectives asked who was driving. Raymond said he could not see. They asked whether anyone else was in the car. He said he believed there was another person, a passenger. The investigators asked if he recognized the vehicle. He said yes. It belonged to Edward Kane. That statement contradicted Michael. Michael had claimed the car was rarely used. Raymond said otherwise. He said everyone at the company knew Kane's car. Then investigators asked the most important question. Why had Raymond never told police? He said because he was scared. Scared of whom? Raymond looked at the detectives. He said Hale. That name returned again. Richard Hale. The executive who had never been considered a suspect. The man who had apparently known about Claire. The man whose financial records Claire had been examining. The man connected to the private office. The man whose property Claire had marked on her map. And now the man Raymond claimed had frightened employees into silence. The investigators searched Hale's background. He had died years earlier, but his records remained. Business records, bank records, property records, and personal correspondence. One letter was particularly important. It had been written shortly after Claire disappeared. Hale wrote to an associate that the situation had become unacceptable. He said certain records needed to be removed. The letter did not mention Claire. It did not mention murder. But the date was only days after her disappearance. The investigators compared the handwriting. It matched Hale's known writing. The contents were ambiguous, but the timing was chilling. Someone inside the company had been ordering records removed, and Claire had been investigating those same records. The detectives now had a possible motive, but they still did not know what happened to Claire. The search for physical evidence continued. Investigators returned to the original scene where Claire's car had been found. The area had changed. Buildings had been demolished. Parking lots expanded. New roads had been built. But one old structure remained, an abandoned warehouse. In 1982, it had been used by the printing company. The detectives searched historical property records. The warehouse had been controlled by a company associated with Hale. It was less than 2 miles from where Claire's car was found. And according to Raymond, employees sometimes used the building to store documents. The investigators obtained access. They searched the old structure. Most of it was empty. Dust covered the floor. Broken shelving lined the walls. Years of neglect had turned the building into a shed. Then a detective noticed something behind a false wall, a narrow cavity. Inside was an old metal filing cabinet. The cabinet was locked. A locksmith opened it. Inside were dozens of papers. Most were ordinary business documents. Then they found something different. A folder. The label was faded, but the name was clear. Claire Donovan. The investigators stopped. Nobody had expected to find her name there. The folder was opened carefully. Inside were photocopies, financial records, notes, and a handwritten statement. The handwriting appeared to be Claire. The first line read, "I know what they are hiding." The investigators continued reading. Claire had documented money transfers. She had recorded names. She had listed dates. She had described conversations. And at the bottom of the final page was one sentence. "If anything happens to me, start with the blue car." The room went silent. The forgotten evidence had just connected the victim's own words to the vehicle witnesses had described. The blue car. The damaged rear light. Edward Kane. Michael Trent. Raymond Pike. Richard Hale. The case had spent decades buried beneath missing records and forgotten memory. Now Claire herself was pointing investigators toward the answer. But the folder contained one more page. A page that had been folded separately. On it was a single name. Not Kane. Not Michael. Not Raymond. Not Hale. A name investigators had never heard before. And next to it, Claire had written for word. "He knows where I am." The investigation had just taken another turn. Because if Claire had written that sentence before she disappeared, then someone may have known exactly what was going to happen. And the person she named had never been questioned. The name on Claire Donovan's final page was Thomas Vale. It meant nothing to the detectives at first. No arrest record. No connection in the original police report. No witness statement. No mention in the newspapers. Nothing. Just a name written in Claire's handwriting beside 4 words that now seemed impossible to ignore. "He knows where I am." Investigators searched every database available to them. Thomas Vale had existed. That was certain. He had lived in Pittsburgh in 1982. He had worked in transportation. He had rented an apartment less than 3 miles from Claire's campus. And, according to employment records, he had occasionally delivered materials to the same printing company connected to Edward Kane and Richard Hale. That connection alone would have been interesting. But then detectives found the vehicle record. Vale had owned a dark blue sedan, a 1978 model. The rear light on the driver's side had been replaced twice. The first replacement was recorded in September 1982. The second came after the car was sold. The investigators looked at the original repair invoice. The description was exact. Rear left lamp assembly damaged. The date was October 1982, only days before Claire disappeared. The detectives stared at the document. It was the kind of detail that would have meant nothing in another case. Now it felt like a warning from the past. They searched Vale's history. He had no known violent conviction. No arrest for assault. No criminal record involving women. No obvious reason to suspect him. But investigators discovered something else. Vale had worked as a driver for a small transport contractor. His job required him to move sealed boxes between businesses. One of those businesses was Richard Hale's company. Another was the printing company. A third was the warehouse investigators had just searched, the same warehouse where Claire's folder had been found. The case was beginning to form a circle. Claire had been investigating financial records. She had copied documents. She had apparently feared someone. She had written Thomas Vale's name. She had mentioned the blue car, and a blue car connected to Vale had been seen around her disappearance. But the detectives still had no proof that Vale had ever spoken to Claire. They needed to find the connection. They searched old telephone records. Most had disappeared, but one billing archive survived. A number associated with Vale appeared repeatedly. Calls had been made to a number registered to Claire's apartment. The dates were especially troubling. Several calls occurred during the week before Claire disappeared. The calls were brief. One lasted 38 seconds. Another lasted less than a minute. The final call occurred the night before she vanished. It lasted 11 minutes. 11 minutes. Long enough for something important to be said. Long enough for a threat. Long enough for a warning. Investigators wanted to know who had made the call. The number belonged to Vale. They now had their first direct connection. But there was another mystery. Why had Claire never mentioned him to her roommate? Why had police never discovered the call? And why had Vale never appeared in the original investigation? The detectives searched the original case file. They found the answer. The telephone records had been requested, but the report had been filed under an incorrect number. The detective who handled the request had written the wrong final digit. The records returned were incomplete. The mistake was never discovered. For 40 years, one small clerical error had hidden a critical connection. Now investigators had the correct number, and it changed everything. The calls were not random. They followed a pattern. Vale called Claire. Claire called Vale. Then Vale called again. The last call came less than 24 hours before her disappearance. Investigators located Vale's former residence. The building still existed. The apartment had changed owners several times, but the landlord's old records were preserved. Vale had rented the apartment in 1981. He moved out shortly after Claire disappeared. The move-out date was October 30th. Claire disappeared on October 17th. 13 days later, Vale was gone. The detectives tracked him through employment records. He had moved to Ohio, then Indiana, then Illinois, then Arizona. He had changed jobs repeatedly. He had used different mailing addresses. Nothing illegal, but the pattern was unusual. Investigators wondered whether he had been running from something. They located his current address. Thomas Vale was alive, 70 years old, retired, living quietly. The detectives arranged an interview. Vale agreed. He appeared calm. He was polite. He answered questions. Then investigators placed Claire's photograph in front of him. Vale looked at it for several seconds. He said he remembered her. That was the first admission. He claimed she had asked him for transportation. He said she wanted to visit someone outside Pittsburgh. The detectives asked who. Vale said he did not remember. They asked whether he drove her. He said no. They asked whether he owned a blue sedan. Yes. They asked whether the vehicle had a damaged rear light. Yes. They asked whether he had driven it on October 17. He said he could not remember. The detectives asked about his telephone calls with Claire. Vale became uncomfortable. He said he had spoken with her. They asked what they discussed. He said business. What business? He refused to elaborate. The detectives asked whether Claire had accused someone of stealing money. Vale said he did not know. Then they asked whether Claire had ever visited the warehouse. Vale said no. That answer was immediately suspicious, because investigators had not told him about the warehouse. They had simply asked whether Claire had visited it. Vale answered no. How would he know they were asking about a location connected to the investigation? The detectives asked him why he seemed nervous. Vale said he was old. He said he did not remember events from 40 years ago. The interview ended, but investigators had enough to request a deeper examination of his history. They searched employment records. Vale had worked at the warehouse during the month Claire disappeared. His official job title was driver, but another document described him as a security assistant. That meant he had access to the building. He could enter after hours. He could move boxes. He could control who entered. And he had apparently known Claire. The detectives returned to the warehouse. They searched again. This time, they focused on old structural features. Behind the filing cabinet was a narrow corridor. The corridor led to a loading area. A concrete floor showed several repaired sections. The investigators used ground-penetrating equipment. One section produced an anomaly. The area had been disturbed decades earlier. A forensic excavation began, layer by layer, carefully, slowly. Then the team found something, a piece of metal. It looked like part of a buckle. The laboratory examined it. The material was consistent with a belt or bag clasp. Claire had carried a canvas bag on the night she disappeared. Her family had described the bag. The clasp was similar, but there was no way to prove it belonged to her. The investigators continued. They found several fragments of fabric. Most were too damaged. Then one fragment produced biological material. The laboratory extracted a partial profile. It did not match the unknown profile from Claire's car. It was different, but it was human, and it had been buried inside a section of the warehouse floor. The investigators asked a forensic anthropologist to examine the site. The disturbance was old, possibly decades old. The concrete had been repaired. The repair appeared to have been made shortly after 1982. That was another coincidence. There were now too many coincidences. Vale worked there. Kane's company used the building. Claire's folder was hidden there. The floor had been repaired, and biological material was found beneath it. But investigators still had no body. They needed to determine whether the material could belong to Claire. The laboratory compared it with her family DNA. The result was inconclusive. The sample was too degraded. But investigators refused to stop. They examined the canvas bag mentioned in the original report. Claire's family still had it. It had been stored for decades. The bag had been recovered from her apartment after she disappeared. The detectives tested the remaining fiber. A distinctive material was found. It was similar to the fabric recovered from the warehouse. Not identical, but similar. Then came another discovery. A photograph taken during the original search showed Claire's apartment. On the desk was a handwritten list. The photograph had been ignored because investigators were focused on finding her. Modern enhancement made the writing easier to read. 3 names were visible: Edward Kane, Thomas Vale, Richard Hale, and beside them were numbers. The numbers appeared to correspond to dates. Claire had been tracking them. Investigators compared those dates with financial records. They matched several money transfers. The case was no longer simply about a missing student. Claire had apparently uncovered a financial scheme. She had identified the people connected to it. She had copied records. She had begun documenting their movements. And then she disappeared. The detectives now believe the murder investigation could have started as something else entirely. Claire may not have been targeted because of a personal relationship. She may have been targeted because she had discovered something powerful people wanted hidden. That possibility changed the way investigators looked at Michael Trent. He had initially been treated as the obvious suspect. Young, close to Claire, inconsistent statements. But perhaps he had not been the killer. Perhaps he had been protecting someone. Investigators interviewed him again. This time, they asked about Thomas Vale. Michael said Vale had driven for Hale. They asked whether he had ever seen Claire with Vale. Michael said yes. That was another bombshell. How many times? Michael said twice. Where? Near the warehouse. When? The week before Claire disappeared. Why had he never mentioned this? Michael looked exhausted. He said because he was afraid. Afraid of Vale? Michael said no. Afraid of Hale. The detectives asked what Hale had threatened. Michael said Hale had told him that people who talked would lose everything. His job. His home. His future. Michael said he believed Hale had connections. He believed police could be influenced. He believed nobody would protect him. The detectives asked why he had lied for decades. Michael said he had been protecting himself. Then he finally described the night Claire disappeared. He said Claire called him. She told him she had found something. She said she was going to meet someone. Michael asked who. Claire refused to tell him. Then she said one thing. She said she had been followed. Michael offered to pick her up. She said no. She told him she would handle it. That was the last conversation he admitted having with her. But there was one detail he had kept hidden. He had seen the blue sedan that night. He said it was parked near Claire's apartment. The driver was Thomas Vale. And Michael claimed Vale was not alone. Someone was sitting in the passenger seat. Michael could not see the person's face, but he remembered something. A distinctive silver watch. The detectives searched old photographs of Hale. Richard Hale wore a silver watch. Always. At company events. In business portraits. In photographs taken years earlier. It was one of his most recognizable possessions. If Michael was telling the truth, then the man in the passenger seat could have been Hale. But Hale was dead. So investigators had to reconstruct the timeline again. They searched Hale's travel records. On the night Claire disappeared, Hale's official schedule showed him attending a dinner meeting across town. The meeting supposedly ended at 10:30. Claire's last confirmed sighting occurred before 10. The timing was possible, but there was no proof he left the dinner. Investigators contacted surviving attendees. One remembered Hale leaving early. Another remembered him being absent for nearly an hour. The old alibi was beginning to collapse. Then investigators found the most damaging document yet, a parking receipt. Issued on the night Claire disappeared. The vehicle was registered to Hale's company. The location was near Claire's apartment. The time was 9:52 p.m. That was only 5 minutes after the convenience store receipt. The dark blue sedan had been seen. Claire had been seen. Hale's company vehicle was nearby, and Thomas Vale had access to a matching car. The detectives now believed the original investigation had missed a coordinated sequence. Claire had been watched. She had been followed. She had been contacted. She had been threatened. And someone had taken her somewhere. But the most important evidence was still missing: her body. Without it, prosecutors would face a difficult case. The detectives knew that. So they returned to the one place Claire herself had marked: the citrus property. They searched deeper. They expanded the perimeter. They examined old aerial photographs. The landscape in 1982 had been different. A dirt road once ran behind the property. That road no longer existed. But the aerial image showed something strange: a vehicle track leading into a wooded area. The track ended at a small clearing. Investigators searched the clearing. Nothing obvious appeared. Then one detective noticed a concrete marker. It was almost completely covered by vegetation. Underneath was a small metal plate. The plate carried an old company identification number. The same number appeared on a warehouse inventory record. The investigators traced it. The item had been listed as a storage container, a large metal box. Its location was recorded as the citrus property. The box had disappeared from the inventory 2 days after Claire vanished. The detective stared at the record. 2 days. That was all. 2 days after Claire disappeared, the container was gone. Nobody knew where it went, except perhaps the person who moved it. And suddenly, the investigators had a new question. What had been inside that box? Because if Claire's missing evidence had been transported there, and the box had disappeared immediately after her disappearance, then someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to remove whatever she had discovered. The case was no longer simply a cold murder investigation. It was becoming a story about a deliberate cover-up. And somewhere in the missing records was the answer to one final question: where had the box gone? The investigators traced the company inventory number one more time. The trail led to a property in western Pennsylvania, a property that had been owned by Edward Kane, and according to the records, it had remained there for nearly 20 years. Then, in 2001, the property was sold. The buyer reported finding an abandoned metal container behind an old garage. He had never opened it. He had simply moved it. The container was still there. And investigators were now preparing to see what 40 years of silence had been protecting. The metal container had been sitting behind the garage for years. Rain had fallen on it. Snow had covered it. Summer heat had baked the rust into the seam. Nobody knew what was inside. The property owner had assumed it was abandoned industrial equipment. He had moved it once to clear space, then left it alone. 40 years after Claire Donovan disappeared, investigators finally stood in front of it. The container was not large, but it was heavy. Its exterior carried layers of rust and old paint. One side still showed a faded company identification number, the same number investigators had found in the 1982 warehouse records. There was no question now. This was the missing container, the one removed from the citrus property 2 days after Claire vanished. The detectives photographed everything before touching it. The hinges were corroded. The locking mechanism was damaged. Inside, the air smelled of rust and old paper. The first items were ordinary: broken tools, old invoices, electrical components. Then they found a cardboard box. Inside were documents, dozens of them: bank statements, company ledgers, invoices, copies of contracts, and several handwritten notes. The investigators began sorting them. Then one page stopped them cold. It contained a list of names: Edward Kane, Thomas Vale, Richard Hale, Michael Trent, and Claire Donovan. Next to each name were dates. Some were crossed out. Some had dollar amounts. Others had short handwritten comments. The page appeared to document meetings and payments. The detectives photographed every line. Then they found another folder. This one was wrapped in plastic. The plastic had protected the contents remarkably well. Inside was a series of photocopies, financial transfers, fake invoices, shell companies, payments made to accounts that appeared to have no legitimate business purpose. The investigators quickly realized Claire had not imagined anything. She had discovered a real financial operation. The records suggested that money had been moved through multiple companies. Some of the companies existed only on paper. Others had legitimate businesses but unexplained transfers. The total amount was substantial, millions of dollars over several years. Claire had been tracking it, and someone had been trying to stop her. The detectives continued searching. Then they found a photograph. It showed 4 men standing outside the warehouse: Hale, Kane, Vale, and Michael. The photograph was dated October 1982, only days before Claire disappeared. The detectives enlarged it. There was something in the background: a blue sedan, the same damaged rear light, the vehicle that witnesses had remembered. The photograph was not proof of murder, but it placed all 4 men together at the warehouse at the exact time period investigators were examining. Then they found something else: a second photograph. This one showed Claire. She was standing several feet away. The photograph had apparently been taken without her knowledge. Someone had written on the back, "She knows." The handwriting was not immediately identified. The investigators photographed it, then sealed it. The container continued to produce evidence: a receipt, a key, a small Cosette, and finally, a folded piece of paper. The paper contained a sentence: "Move everything before Friday." The date was October 20th, still 1982. Claire disappeared on October 17th. The implication was chilling. Someone had planned to move evidence immediately after she vanished. Investigators compared the handwriting. It appeared similar to documents signed by Richard Hale. The comparison was not definitive, but it was enough to send the evidence to a handwriting specialist. The Cosette was even more important. It was an old audio recording. Investigators had already found one tape in Claire's belongings. Now they had another. This one had been stored inside the container. The tape was labeled only, needing 10/16. The day before Claire disappeared, forensic technicians digitized the recording. At first, there was only static, then voices. Several men. The audio was muffled, but one voice was unmistakably angry. Another voice tried to calm him. Then a woman's voice appeared. Claire. She was there, alive. The investigators listened in silence. Claire accused someone of stealing money. She said she had copies. She said she would take them to police. A man told her she did not understand what she had found. Claire replied that she understood perfectly. Then another man spoke. His voice was quieter. He told Claire that if she went to the police, people would lose everything. Claire said she was not responsible for their crime. There was a pause. Then someone said, "You should have left this alone." The recording ended. The detectives played it again and again. They isolated the voices. They identified Claire. They identified Michael. The third voice sounded like Thomas Vale. The fourth was harder to determine. But there was a strong possibility it was Richard Hale. The investigators now had something the original case never had: an audio recording placing Claire in a confrontation with several men connected to the financial scheme, one day before she disappeared. The evidence was extraordinary, but there was still no direct recording of murder, no confession, no body, no statement explaining what happened after the meeting. Investigators needed the missing hour. They returned to the original timeline. Claire left the meeting. The blue sedan was seen. The company vehicle appeared near her apartment. Then Claire disappeared. The container was moved. Documents vanished. And within weeks, people connected to the company began leaving Pittsburgh. The investigators now believed the sequence was deliberate, but they needed to know who had given the final order. The handwriting evidence pointed toward Hale. The financial records pointed toward Hale. The property records pointed toward Hale. The Hale had died years earlier. He could not be arrested. He could not be prosecuted. If he had orchestrated the crime, someone else had carried it out. The detectives focused on Thomas Vale. Vale was alive. He had access to vehicles. He knew the warehouse. He knew Claire. He had spoken with her repeatedly. He had left Pittsburgh shortly after her disappearance, and his name was written on Claire's final page. The investigators obtained a warrant for another DNA comparison. They needed to compare Vale with the biological material recovered from Claire's car. The laboratory processed the sample. The results came back. Vale was excluded. That was unexpected. The detectives had believed the unknown DNA might belong to him. It did not. The suspect hunt widened again. The biological contributor was someone else. The investigators returned to the audio recording. They isolated the unidentified voice. Voice analysts compared it against historical recording. The quality was poor, but the rhythm, the accent, the speech pattern, everything pointed toward one person, Michael Trent. The investigators stopped. Michael had already been excluded from the DNA sample, but the voice sounded like him. Could the recording have been altered? Could the sample have belonged to someone else? The detectives confronted Michael. He admitted being at the meeting. For the first time, he said Claire had asked him to come. He said she wanted protection. He claimed he left before anything happened. The detectives asked when. Michael gave a time. It contradicted the recording. His voice was present after the time he claimed to have left. The detectives played the audio. Michael listened. Then he said something unexpected. He admitted it was him, but he insisted he had not hurt Claire. He said he had been trying to help her. The investigators asked why he had lied for 40 years. Michael said because he had been afraid of Hale. They asked what happened after the meeting. Michael refused to answer. They asked whether Claire left a lot. He said yes. That statement matched Patrick's old account from another case theory, but this was Pittsburgh. Now investigators had two independent lines of testimony suggesting Claire had left the meeting a lot. The question became where she went next. Michael finally said she was taken to the warehouse. Who took her? He said Thomas Vale. Why? Because Vale believed Claire had hidden copies of the financial records. The detectives asked whether Hale knew. Michael said yes. They asked what happened inside the warehouse. Michael said he did not know. But the investigators did not believe him. They showed him the photograph. The four men. The blue car. The warehouse. Michael looked at it for a long time. Then he pointed to Hale. He said Hale was the one giving orders. The detectives asked what orders. Michael said, "Get the papers. Make sure she doesn't talk." The room became silent. Still, that was not a confession to murder. It was an allegation. A statement from a man who had spent decades protecting himself. The investigators needed corroboration. They found it in the financial records. A payment had been made to Vale 2 days after Claire disappeared. The amount was large. The description was vague. Special services. There were no invoices, no work records, no explanation. A second payment followed 3 weeks later. Then another. The payments continued for months. Vale had been receiving money from a company controlled by Hale. The timing was difficult to explain. The detectives interviewed the surviving accountant. He said the payments were unusual. He had questioned them. Hale had told him not to ask questions. That was another piece of the puzzle. Then investigators found a second bank account. It belonged to Michael. A deposit had been made 3 days after Claire disappeared. The money came from the same company. Michael had never reported it. The detectives confronted him. He finally admitted receiving it. He said it was payment for silence. That was the first time Michael openly acknowledged the cover-up. He claimed Hale had paid him because Michael had seen Claire with Vale. He said he was told to forget what he knew. The detectives asked whether he had helped move Claire. Michael said no. They asked whether he had helped move the container. Michael said no. Then investigators showed him the photograph of the container. Michael stared at it. He said he had seen it before. Where? At the Citrus property. When? The day after Claire disappeared. The timeline was becoming clearer. Claire disappeared on October 17th. On October 18th, the container was moved. On October 19th, the company began transferring records. On October 20th, Hale ordered everything removed. And on October 21st, the warehouse inventory was altered. Someone had moved quickly. Very quickly. The detectives believed the purpose was simple. Erase the evidence. That there was still one missing piece. Where had Claire gone after leaving the warehouse? Investigators returned to the Citrus property. The property had changed over the years, but old aerial photographs revealed a small structure that no longer existed. A maintenance shed. The shed had been demolished sometime in the 1990s. In 1982, it stood near an irrigation ditch. Investigators searched historical maintenance record. The shed had been repaired shortly after Claire disappeared. Why? The records listed structural damage. No details. The investigators obtained old photographs. The shed appeared intact before October 1982. After October, part of the roof had been replaced. The ground near the shed showed signs of excavation. Investigators returned with modern equipment. They scanned the area. One section produced a large anomaly. The team excavated. They found pieces of old timber, then a rusted metal object, then fabric. The fabric was dark, different from the jacket material recovered earlier. Laboratory testing revealed biological material. This time, the profile was stronger. Investigators compared it with Claire's family DNA. The result indicated a possible relationship. The sample was not complete, but the statistical probability was significant enough to warrant further testing. The detectives knew what that meant. They might finally be standing above the place where Claire's remains had been hidden. The excavation continued. Every inch was documented. Every fragment was bagged. Every piece of soil was examined. Then the shovel struck something hard. Not metal. Not stone. Something organic. The forensic team stopped immediately. The area was secured. Investigators began removing soil by hand. The first fragment appeared. Then another. Then something that looked unmistakably human. The case had spent 40 years without a body. Now the earth was beginning to give one back. And as investigators carefully exposed what had been buried beneath the old shed, they realized the evidence was not only about how Claire died, it could also reveal who had stood beside her during her final moments. Because among the soil and fragments was something no one expected to find. A small object bearing a distinctive engraved symbol. A symbol investigators recognized from the old company records. And that object would connect the crime directly to the person who had spent decades insisting he knew nothing about Claire Donovan. The object was small enough to fit inside a detective's palm. A silver key. Not a house key. Not a car key. A narrow industrial key with a number stamped into the metal. Investigators photographed it before moving it. The number was badly worn, but several digits remained visible. They compared it against the old company inventory. The key belonged to a storage lock, a lock used by Richard Hale's company. That discovery immediately raised another question. Why had a company key been buried beside the remains? The investigators did not answer it yet. They kept digging. The excavation around the old maintenance shed continued through the afternoon. The soil was carefully screened. Every fragment was collected. Every object was cataloged. Then the forensic team uncovered what appeared to be a section of clothing. The material was badly deteriorated, but a metal zipper remained. A small piece of fabric was still attached. Claire's family had described the clothing she wore the night she disappeared. A light jacket, dark trousers, canvas shoes. The zipper pattern appeared consistent with the jacket. Investigators sent the material to the laboratory. They also collected bone fragments. The condition was poor, but modern forensic techniques could still reveal identity. The samples were sent for testing. The entire investigation now depended on a question nobody had been able to answer since 1982. Was this Claire Donovan? The detectives did not tell the family immediately. They refused to raise hope without certainty. Instead, they returned to the evidence. The industrial key became their focus. The stamped number was traced to a lockbox used inside the warehouse. According to old records, the box had been assigned to Thomas Vale. That was another connection. Vale had claimed he had never handled company storage equipment. The records said otherwise. He had signed for the box. He had returned it. And the lock had been listed as missing after Claire disappeared. The key found beside the remains was the key to that missing lock. Investigators now had a direct physical connection between Vale and the burial site. But Vale was still alive, and he had already denied knowing what happened. Detectives went back to his house. This time, they brought photographs. The key. The warehouse. The citrus property. Claire's photograph. Vale looked at them. He said nothing. The detectives asked whether he recognized the key. Vale said no. They placed the old inventory record in front of him. His signature was visible. He stared at it. Then he said he had forgotten. The detectives asked whether he had ever been at the citrus property. He said yes. That was another change. Earlier, he had denied it. Now he admitted visiting the property. When? He said he did not remember. Why? He said Hale had sent him there. For what? He refused to answer. The detectives told him human remains had been discovered. Vale closed his eyes. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he whispered, "I knew she was there." The investigators froze. He had just said something no suspect had ever said. He knew Claire was there. Not might have been. Not possibly. Was there. The detectives asked what he meant. Vale said he had been told. By whom? He said Richard Hale. When? After Claire disappeared. Why? Vale said Hale had ordered him to help move something. Something? Vale refused to specify. The investigators pushed harder. They asked whether it was Claire. Vale said he did not know. The detectives pointed out the contradiction. He had just said he knew she was there. Vale looked down. He said he had not killed her. That was the first time he used the word. Again, investigators had not. They asked what happened. Vale said he arrived at the property after dark. Hale was there. Michael was there. Edward Kane was there. And Claire was already dead. The statement changed everything. But it was also impossible to accept without corroboration. Vale had every reason to shift blame. Hale was dead. Kane was dead. Michael had already admitted lying. Vale could accuse anyone. The detectives needed evidence. They asked what had killed Claire. Vale said he did not know. They asked who killed her. He said he did not see. They asked who was present. He repeated the names. Hale, Kane, Michael, and himself. 4 men. 1 victim. A burial site. And 40 years of silence. The detectives asked why he had never told anyone. Vale said Hale threatened him. He claimed Hale told him that if he talked, his family would suffer. The investigators asked why he had continued receiving money. Vale said he had been paid to keep quiet. The financial records supported part of that claim, but not all of it. The investigators asked about the industrial key. Vale said Hale gave it to him. Why was it buried? Vale said he did not know. The detectives asked whether he helped bury Claire. He said no. They asked whether he helped move her. He hesitated, then admitted that he had driven the vehicle. Which vehicle? The dark blue sedan. The same vehicle seen near Claire. The same vehicle connected to Kane. Vale said Kane was driving it first. He claimed Kane picked up Claire. Then, later, Vale drove. The timeline was becoming clearer. Claire had been taken from one location to another. The blue sedan had moved through the city, and eventually, the vehicle had arrived at the Citrus property. The detectives asked where Claire had been when Vale took over the driving. Vale said she was in the back seat, alive. That statement contradicted his earlier claim. Earlier, he said Claire was already dead when he arrived. Now he said she had been alive. The detectives asked why he had lied. Vale said he was scared. They asked who had hurt her. He said Hale. That accusation needed evidence. But there was something else. The medical examination of the remains was beginning. The forensic pathologist could not determine the exact cause of death immediately. The bones had suffered significant environmental damage, but there was evidence of trauma, a fracture, possibly consistent with a severe blow. There was also evidence of a second injury. The investigators knew they might never reconstruct the entire attack, but they could establish one critical fact. Claire had not died naturally. The case was now officially a homicide. The family was notified. After 4 decades, Claire Donovan had finally been identified. The announcement shocked Pittsburgh. People who had forgotten the case saw her photograph again. The young woman in the old picture. The college student who disappeared in 1982. The daughter whose mother had kept her room unchanged. The friend whose classmates had searched for her. She was no longer missing. She was a murder victim. And now investigators needed to determine who would be responsible. The evidence pointed towards several men, but the prosecution could not simply rely on suspicion. The investigators began reconstructing the final hour. The audio recording became critical. Claire had been alive during the meeting. She had confronted the men. She had threatened to go to police. Then she left. The blue sedan followed. The vehicle records placed Vale near the warehouse. Michael had admitted being present. Hale had ordered records destroyed. Kane had owned the vehicle. The financial payments connected them all. And now Claire's remains had been found at the property. But the exact moment of her death remained uncertain. The detectives returned to the warehouse. They searched every document recovered from the container. One ledger contained handwritten entries. Several payments were listed. One was dated October 18th. The description was simply removal. Another entry was dated October 19th. Property. A third was dated October 20th. Cleanup. Investigators believed those entries referred to the destruction of evidence, but the handwriting needed to be identified. The first two matched writing attributed to an employee. The third appeared different. The forensic examiner compared it with Hale's known handwriting. The similarities were strong. A handwriting analysis could not establish absolute certainty. The investigators needed something stronger. They found it in a bank record. On October 20th, Hale withdrew a large amount of cash. The transaction occurred only hours after the container was moved. The cash was then divided into smaller payments. One went to Vale. Another went to Michael. A third went to an unknown person. The account number was traced. It belonged to a private contractor, a man named Leonard Shaw. Shaw had worked as a demolition contractor. He had been hired to remove structures from the Citrus property. Investigators found the contract. The date was October 21st, SIL 1982, only 4 days after Claire disappeared. The work order described the maintenance shed as damaged. The investigators examined the contractor's records. Shaw had been paid in cash. The amount was unusually high. He had also signed a statement confirming that no hazardous materials were present. The detectives located Shaw's family. Shaw himself had died years earlier, but his daughter still had boxes of his personal papers. Among them was a notebook. The notebook contained job details, names, addresses, payments, and one entry. October 21st. Move soil. Hale property. No questions. The investigators stared at the word. It was not a confession, but it confirmed that something unusual had happened at the property immediately after Claire disappeared. The next page contained another note. Blue card delivered by TV. Thomas Vale. The initials matched. The evidence was becoming overwhelming, but investigators still needed to know what happened inside the shed. The forensic team returned to the burial site. They found remnants of old concrete. The original floor had been replaced. Beneath it, they discovered another layer of disturbed soil. The disturbance was consistent with the burial. The forensic pathologist examined the remains again. A small fragment of metal was recovered from the clothing. It was not part of the jacket. It was a broken watch clasp. The investigators compared it with photographs of Claire. She had not been wearing a watch. Then they examined the old photographs of Hale. The silver watch. The one Michael remembered. The one Hale wore constantly. The clasp design matched. It was not enough to say Hale had been present, but it suggested that something belonging to him had been near Claire's body. The detectives returned to Vale. They showed him the clasp. His expression changed. He said Hale had been wearing the watch that night. The detectives asked whether Hale struck Claire. Vale said he did not see it. They asked whether Kane did. Vale said he did not know. They asked whether Michael did. Vale said no. Then they asked the question that mattered most. Who was the last person Claire spoke to? Vale answered quietly. Richard. The investigators asked what she said. Vale said Claire told Hale she would expose him. Hale warned her. She refused to back down. Then the argument became violent. Vale claimed he left the shed before Claire was killed. But investigators now had another problem. If Vale was telling the truth, who remained with Claire? The answer appeared in another document from the container. A typed memo. It was addressed to Kane. The memo instructed him to handle the situation personally. The date was October 17th, the day Claire disappeared. Investigators compared the typewriter ribbon from Hale's office. The memo had been typed on the same machine. That placed Kane directly in the operation. But Kane was dead. His silence could never be challenged. The detectives now focused on Michael. He was alive, and he had been there. He had received money. He had lied. He had admitted seeing Claire. He had known about the blue car, and he had never told investigators about Hale. When detectives confronted him with the new evidence, Michael finally broke. He admitted that he had been at the Citrus property. He admitted seeing Claire. He admitted that Hale had ordered everyone to remain silent, but he insisted he had not killed her. Then he said something investigators had never heard before. Michael claimed Claire was still alive when he left. He said she was sitting inside the shed. Hale and Kane were arguing with her. Vale was outside. Michael said he walked away. He claimed he could hear Claire shouting. Then he heard a loud impact. He turned around. He saw Hale standing over her. That was the first direct accusation against Hale, but it created a final problem. Hale was dead. The person who could be prosecuted was still unknown. Investigators now believed Hale had orchestrated the cover-up, but who had delivered the fatal blow? Kane? Vale? Michael? Or someone else? The answer might be hidden inside the old audio recording. Technicians enhanced the final second. For the first time, a faint sound became audible. A vehicle door. Footsteps. Then Claire's voice. She said one name. Not Hale. Not Kane. Not Vale. Not Michael. A different name. The recording had captured it only once, but it was clear enough. The investigators froze when they heard it, because the person Claire named had never appeared in the case file, and unlike Hale and Kane, that person was still alive. The name on the recording was Daniel Mercer. For 40 years, Daniel Mercer had lived outside Pittsburgh under a different rhythm of life. Work, family, church, quiet neighborhoods, no criminal record, no newspaper stories, no connection, at least on paper, to the disappearance of Claire Donovan. But Claire had said his name. Once. At the end of a recording investigators had nearly discarded. The detectives replayed the audio again. Claire's voice was weak. The recording was filled with static. A door slammed. Someone shouted. Then Claire said it. Daniel. One word. Then the tape ended. Investigators isolated the frequency. They removed background noise. They enhanced the final seconds. The word remained. Daniel. The next step was simple. Find Daniel Mercer. The search produced an immediate result. He was alive. 73 years old. Retired. Living in a small town several hours from Pittsburgh. Investigators requested an interview. Mercer agreed. He arrived with an attorney. He looked calm. He had no reason to believe the interview would become an interrogation. The detectives placed Claire's photograph on the table. Mercer looked at it. He said he remembered her. That was the second shock. They asked how. He said she had been a student. They asked whether they had met. He said yes. Where? At the printing company. When? He claimed he could not remember. The detectives placed the warehouse photograph in front of him. Mercer appeared in the background, standing near a delivery truck. The photograph had been taken in October 1982. He could not deny it. He admitted working for the company as an outside contractor. The investigators asked whether he knew Richard Hale. Yes. Edward Kane? Yes. Thomas Vale? Yes. Michael Trent? Yes. Claire Donovan? He hesitated, then said yes. The detectives asked why he had never been interviewed. Mercer said nobody had ever asked. That was technically possible. But investigators knew the original case file. His name was absent. Completely. No witness list. No employment interview. No background check. Nothing. The detectives asked where he was on October 17th, still 1982. Mercer said he was home. The detectives placed a document on the table. A company delivery log. His name appeared. Time of departure. 8:47 p.m. Destination. Hale property. Return time. Not recorded. Mercer looked at the paper. He said the record could be wrong. The detectives asked whether he had driven a company truck. He said yes. They asked whether he visited the citrus property. He said no. Another document appeared. A fuel receipt. The truck had been refueled near the property. 9:41 p.m. Claire's last confirmed activity occurred around the same time. Mercer had been there. He was now forced to admit it. He said he had delivered equipment. What equipment? He could not remember. The detectives asked whether he saw Claire. Mercer said no. Then they played the recording. Claire's voice filled the room. Daniel. Mercer's expression changed. He asked where they got it. The detectives did not answer. They played it again. Mercer listened. Then he leaned back. He said Claire had discovered something. What? He said she had found evidence of stolen money. The detectives asked whether Hale was involved. Mercer said yes. They asked whether Kane was involved. Yes. Vale? Yes. Michael? Mercer hesitated. Then said Michael was not part of the operation. That was important. It contradicted some earlier assumptions. The detectives asked why Claire would have said his name. Mercer said he did not know. Then they asked the central question. Did you kill Claire? Mercer said no. Did you see her that night? A long pause. Yes. The room became silent. Mercer finally admitted seeing Claire outside the warehouse. She was arguing with Hale. Kane was there. Vale was there. Michael was nearby. Mercer said Claire was holding a folder. She told Hale she was going to police. Hale demanded the folder. Claire refused. Mercer said he walked away. He claimed he did not see what happened next. The detectives asked why Claire called his name. Mercer said she might have been asking for help. That explanation sounded plausible, but investigators had another question. Why was Mercer there? He said he had been sent by Hale to move equipment. What equipment? He said he did not remember. The detectives showed him the inventory list. A storage container was listed. Mercer had signed for its movement. The date was October 18th, the day after Claire disappeared. Mercer stared at the signature. He said he had forgotten. The investigators knew they were getting closer. They asked where he took the container. Mercer said he did not know. But the records said otherwise. The container had been delivered to Kane's property, then eventually moved again. The same container eventually ended up behind the garage where investigators found it. Mercer had helped move it. That connected him to the cover-up. But did it connect him to Claire's death? Investigators searched his history. They found something unexpected. In 1982, Mercer owned a handgun, a revolver. The weapon had been legally registered. It disappeared from his records after 1983. Mercer claimed it had been stolen. Police reports showed no theft report. The detectives asked where it was. Mercer said he had sold it. To whom? He could not remember. The investigators searched historical firearms records. The gun had never been transferred. It remained registered to Mercer. That meant he had lied. But the case did not establish that the gun had been used to kill Claire. The forensic examination of the remains showed no obvious bullet wound. The murder weapon was still unknown. The detectives returned to the warehouse. They searched for anything connected to Mercer. They found a work jacket in an old storage room. The jacket had been sealed in plastic. A name patch was still attached. Daniel Mercer. The jacket had apparently been abandoned after the company closed. The investigators tested it. No blood. No useful DNA. But one pocket contained something. A receipt. Dated October 17th, still 1982. The time was 10:14 p.m. The location was a gas station near the Citrus property. The receipt showed Mercer had purchased gasoline. That meant his truck had remained in the area after Claire disappeared. The timeline was tightening. Claire was alive shortly before 10. Mercer was near the property. The blue sedan was nearby. Hale was nearby. Kane was nearby. Vale was nearby. Michael had been there. And sometime after that, Claire died. The investigators needed one more thing. They needed to know who had control of the shed. Historical property records showed Hale had leased it, but the access key belonged to Kane, and a second key belonged to Mercer. The silver key recovered beside Claire's remains was not Vale. It was not Kane's. It was not Hale's. It matched a duplicate issued to Mercer. That discovery changed the investigation. Mercer had access. Mercer had been at the property. Mercer had moved the container. Mercer had a key. And Claire had said his name. But investigators still had no direct proof that Mercer killed her. They returned to the audio recorded. This time they examined the background. A clock could be heard. A faint mechanical sound. Then a vehicle engine. Experts identified the engine as a diesel truck. Mercer had driven a diesel company truck. That meant the recording had likely been made near the loading area. Then investigators noticed something else. A metallic sound occurred immediately before Claire said Daniel's name. It sounded like a key entering a lock. The detectives realized Claire may not have been calling for help. She may have been identifying the person who had entered the room. Daniel. The recording ended seconds later. The investigators reconstructed the likely sequence. Claire had confronted Hale. The argument escalated. Mercer entered. Claire recognized him. She said his name. Then the recording stopped. But that still did not prove murder. The detectives needed corroboration. They searched the old company payroll. Mercer had been paid a large bonus shortly after Claire disappeared. The payment was categorized as emergency transport. No explanation. The amount was nearly 3 times his normal monthly income. A second payment followed. Then a third. The money stopped after Hale died. The investigators traced the payments. They came from a company account controlled by Hale. Mercer had received money for months. The detectives asked why. Mercer said it was compensation for overtime, but there were no overtime records, no work orders, no invoices, nothing. The detectives confronted him again. This time, Mercer became angry. He said investigators were trying to blame him because Hale was dead. He said he had made mistakes. He said he had been afraid, but he insisted he did not kill Claire. Then he made a mistake. He said, "I never touched her after she was on the ground." The detectives stopped. They had never told him Claire had been found on the ground. The forensic report had not been released publicly. The original investigation had never disclosed the position of the remains. Mercer had just revealed information only the killer or someone present could have known. The room became silent. His attorney immediately intervened. The interview ended. But the detectives had what they needed: a statement. Not a confession, but a statement that placed Mercer at the scene and suggested knowledge of the murder. Investigators obtained a warrant for his DNA. The comparison was made against biological material recovered from Claire's clothing. The result was not a full match, but it was significant. Mercer's profile could not be excluded from a mixed sample. The probability was extremely low for an unrelated individual. Prosecutors reviewed the evidence. They now had Claire's recorded voice naming Mercer's presence at the warehouse, his access key, his vehicle, his payments from Hale, his role in moving the container, his false statements, his knowledge of the body's position, and DNA evidence placing him near Claire. But there was still another problem. The prosecution needed to prove murder beyond reasonable doubt. The defense could argue that Mercer had been involved in moving evidence after the killing. They could argue Hale and Kane were responsible. They could argue the DNA was transferred. They could argue Claire's statement was ambiguous. The investigators knew this, so they went deeper. They reopened every financial record, every company transfer, every phone call, every vehicle movement, every surviving photograph. They reconstructed October 1982, Minot by Minot, and one detail emerged. At 10:22 p.m., Mercer called a number associated with Hale. The call lasted 17 seconds. At 10:25, the same number called Mercer. The call lasted 32 seconds. At 10:31, Mercer purchased gasoline. At 10:42, the company truck left the property. At 11:03, the blue sedan was seen heading toward the warehouse. The timing suggested coordination, but then investigators found the most important piece. A road camera had been operating near a toll entrance. The technology was primitive. The images were poor, but archived photographs showed vehicles entering the road that night. One image captured a dark blue sedan, another captured the company truck, and another showed something unexpected. The blue sedan was being driven by someone investigators had not previously considered. The photograph was enlarged. The face was barely visible, but the clothing was distinctive: a light-colored jacket, a silver watch, and a dark hat. The driver appeared to be Richard Hale. If correct, Hale had been driving the blue car, but the passenger was impossible to identify. The investigators searched the sequence. A second photograph showed the vehicle several minutes later. The passenger had moved. This time, the face was visible for less than a second. The image was enhanced. The detectives recognized him. Thomas Vale. That meant Vale had been in the car with Hale, and Claire may have been inside. Investigators now had a sequence. Hale drove. Vale accompanied him. Mercer followed in the company truck. Michael was somewhere nearby. Kane's involvement remained unclear. Then the DNA laboratory called. The mixed sample from Claire's clothing had been retested. The profile contained a stronger component. The laboratory could now exclude Vale. It could exclude Michael. It could exclude Kane's known relative. But one person remained statistically consistent: Daniel Mercer. The detectives did not celebrate. They knew what they had: a strong connection. Not the entire story. The prosecutor wanted one more piece of evidence, something that could place Mercer directly inside the shed. Investigators returned to the old property. They searched the remaining structure. Behind a section of wall, they found a rusted nail. Attached to it was a small fragment of fabric. The laboratory compared it with the clothing recovered from Claire. The fibers were consistent. Then they tested the nail. A microscopic biological trace was found. It was old, not usable. The DNA profile matched Claire, and beside it was another partial profile: Mercer. The detectives now had a direct physical link. Mercer had been inside the shed. Claire had been inside the shed. Her DNA was on the same object. His DNA was there too. The case had moved from suspicion to evidence. But the investigators still did not know whether Mercer had acted alone. The financial records suggested an organized operation. The photographs showed Hale and Vale. The audio showed multiple men. Michael had admitted being there. And Claire had named Daniel. The investigators now believed the murder may have involved several people. The challenge was determining who had done what. Then, late one evening, a detective reopened the old Cosette one final time. He listened to the final seconds through headphones. There was Claire. There was the door. There was the sound of the key. Then her voice. "Daniel, please." The recording stopped. The detective rewound it. Played it again. "Daniel, please." Not an accusation. Not a warning. A plea. And suddenly, the entire case sounded different. Because if Claire had been asking Daniel for help, then investigators had been looking at the wrong question. The question was not simply whether Mercer had been there. He clearly had. The question was what he did when Claire asked him for help. And 40 years later, one surviving witness was finally ready to answer that question. The surviving witness was Elena Sharp. She had never appeared in the original case file. Her name had been buried in an old employee directory listed under a temporary clerical position that lasted less than 6 months in 1982. At the time Claire Donovan disappeared, Elena was 24. She worked nights at the printing company. She handled invoices. She answered phones. She prepared delivery paperwork. And according to investigators, she had been inside the warehouse on the night of October 17th. For 40 years, Elena had carried what she remembered without telling anyone. When detectives finally found her, she was living alone in a small house outside Erie. She was 88. Her memory was still sharp. She remembered Claire. She remembered the warehouse. And she remembered Daniel Mercer. The interview began quietly. Elena looked at Claire's photograph for almost a minute. Then she said something that immediately changed the room. She wasn't supposed to be there that night. The detectives asked why. Elena said Claire had come to the warehouse looking for documents. She had been there before. But that night was different. She was angry. She was frightened. And she was carrying a folder. Elena remembered seeing her enter through the side door. Claire asked whether Hale was inside. Elena said yes. Claire walked toward his office. A few minutes later, the shouting began. Elena could not hear every word, but she heard Claire accuse Hale of stealing money. She heard Hale tell her to lower her voice. Then she heard Claire say she had copied. That was when the atmosphere changed. Elena said the building suddenly became silent. Not calm. Silent. The kind of silence that comes when everyone in a room realizes something dangerous has been said. Then she heard a chair scrape. A door opened. Daniel Mercer walked in. Claire saw him. And Elena remembered Claire saying his name. "Daniel, please." The detectives asked what happened next. Elena looked toward the floor. She said Mercer walked toward Claire. He did not appear angry. He appeared nervous. Claire asked him to help her. She said she wanted to leave. Mercer did not answer. Then Hale told him to close the door. Elena said she stepped away. She was afraid. She went into another room. A few seconds later, she heard a loud impact. Then Claire screamed. It was one scream. Short. Sharp. Then nothing. The detectives asked whether Elena saw the attack. She said no. But she saw Mercer leave the room. His hands were shaking. His shirt sleeve was torn. And he was carrying Claire's folder. The detectives asked where Hale was. Elena said he followed Mercer out. Then she saw Thomas Vale enter. Vale was carrying something wrapped in a dark blanket. The detectives asked what it was. Elena said she did not know, but she remembered the shape. It was long, heavy, and Vale struggled to carry it. That detail was critical, because investigators had spent decades trying to determine who moved Claire after her death. Now they had a witness describing it. But Elena had more. She said Michael Trent appeared minutes later. He looked terrified. He asked whether Claire was alive. Hale told him to stop asking questions. Then Hale gave everyone instructions. Nobody called police. Nobody left. Nobody talked. Elena said Hale looked directly at her. He told her that if she wanted to keep her job, she would forget what she had seen. She believed him. She was young. She needed the money. and she was terrified, so she stayed silent. For 40 years, the detectives asked why she finally decided to speak. Elena looked at Claire's photograph again. She said because Claire's mother had died without knowing what happened. She said she could no longer live with the silence. The detectives asked one final question. Who killed Claire? Elena said she did not know. She had not seen the exact blow, but she knew who was in the room. Hale, Mercer, Vale, and Claire. That testimony changed the case. It confirmed the audio. It confirmed the warehouse. It confirmed Mercer's presence. It confirmed the folder. And it confirmed that Claire had been alive when she asked Daniel for help. But prosecutors still needed more. The detectives returned to the old financial records. They focused on the payments made after Claire disappeared. The money to Mercer. The money to Vale. The money to Michael. And another payment. A payment investigators had not previously noticed. It had gone to Elena. Only a small amount. But it was made 3 days after Claire disappeared. Elena had never mentioned receiving it. When confronted, she admitted it. She said Hale gave her cash. He told her it was a bonus. She knew it was not. She accepted it anyway. The detectives asked whether she had been paid to remain silent. Elena said yes. That made her testimony stronger in one way. She was admitting her own involvement in the cover-up. She was not pretending to be innocent. She was telling investigators exactly how afraid she had been. The prosecution now had multiple witnesses describing the same sequence. Claire confronted Hale. Mercer entered. Claire asked Mercer for help. Something violent happened. Mercer left carrying her folder. Vale arrived with something wrapped. Michael arrived afterward. Hale ordered silence. Then the records disappeared. Then Claire disappeared. The remaining question was motive. Why would Mercer kill her? The financial documents provided a possible answer. Claire had discovered that Mercer was not simply a driver. He was moving money. He was transporting documents. He had access to accounts. He had been paid by Hale. And investigators discovered that Mercer had personally signed several false delivery records. Claire had apparently found those records. She had marked his name. She had written beside it, "Ask Daniel." The phrase was found in one of her notebooks. It meant she knew Mercer was involved. But the detectives still did not know whether Mercer had intended to kill her. The answer came from an unexpected source, an old insurance file. Claire had taken out a small life insurance policy through her college. The beneficiary was her mother. The policy contained a handwritten change request. Someone had attempted to alter the beneficiary shortly before Claire disappeared. The request had been rejected because the signature did not match. Investigators sent the document for examination. The handwriting was not Claire's. It appeared to be in an attempt to imitate her. The person trying to change the policy would have benefited from her debt, but the amount was small. Too small to explain murder. The investigators kept looking. Then they found a second document, a much larger policy. This one was connected to a private investment account. Claire had apparently discovered it while examining the company's financial records. The account was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The beneficiary was a shell company. The company was controlled by Hale. If Claire exposed the scheme, the money could be lost. That gave Hale a motive, but it did not explain why Mercer was involved. Investigators discovered the answer in the payment records. Mercer had borrowed money from Hale, a large amount. He had been deeply in debt. Hale had helped him. In exchange, Mercer performed private job, transportation, document removal, collection, and eventually, according to prosecutors, intimidation. Claire had discovered the arrangement. Mercer knew she could expose him. That gave him his own motive. The suspect hunt now narrowed. Hale was the architect. Mercer was the man who could still be prosecuted. Vale had helped move the evidence. Michael had helped conceal the truth. And Claire had been caught between them. But prosecutors still needed to prove who caused the fatal injury. The forensic team re-examined Claire's remains. The fracture pattern was consistent with blunt force trauma. The object that caused it had never been recovered, but investigators examined the warehouse. One item was missing from an old inventory list: a heavy metal tool, a short-handled industrial wrench. It had been listed as company equipment. After October 17th, it disappeared. The wrench had a distinctive marking, a manufacturer's stamp. Investigators searched old photographs. In one photograph taken inside the warehouse, the tool was visible. On the night of the murder, according to Elena, Mercer had been standing near that equipment. The detectives searched historical records for the tool. They found an invoice. The company had purchased 2 identical wrenches. One remained in inventory. The other was missing. Investigators contacted the manufacturer. The model was rare, but one of the tools had been sold again in 1983 to a scrap dealer. The dealer was dead. His records were gone, but his son remembered something. He said his father had once complained about a heavy wrench that had been sold with rust and dried material on it. The detective asked whether he remembered the source. The son did not, but he remembered the date, 1983. Months after Claire's disappearance, investigators located the scrapyard. It had closed decades earlier. The site had been redeveloped. The tool was gone. Another dead end. But the evidence was now converging from multiple directions. Financial records, audio, DNA, witness testimony, vehicle records, the burial site, the key, the missing container, the payment trail, the warehouse, and now a missing weapon. The prosecutor authorized a grand jury investigation. For the first time in decades, the cold case was moving toward criminal charges. But there was still one problem. Thomas Vale. He had admitted being at the property. He had admitted driving the blue sedan. He had admitted helping move something. But he continued to deny murder. Investigators offered him an opportunity to cooperate. He refused. Then they showed him Elena's statement. His reaction was immediate. He said Elena was lying. The detectives asked why. Vale said she had been paid. They showed him the payment record. He became silent. Then he said something unexpected. She saw what happened. The detectives asked what she saw. Vale refused to answer. They asked whether Claire was alive when he arrived. Vale said no. They asked whether Mercer was there. Yes. They asked whether Hale was there. Yes. They asked whether Kane was there. Vale hesitated, then said no. That contradicted earlier statements. Investigators asked why. Vale said Kane had already left. The detectives knew Kane's presence was supported by the audio. They played the recording. Vale listened. Then he said the voice was Kane. The investigators asked why Kane had been there. Vale said because Hale had called him. The entire operation was now taking shape. Claire had uncovered the financial scheme. Hale ordered her stopped. Kane helped arrange the meeting. Mercer confronted her. Vale helped move her afterward. Michael witnessed part of it. Elena witnessed the aftermath. And the others were paid to remain silent. The investigators now had a conspiracy. But the murder itself still centered on Mercer. They returned to him one final time. This time, they did not begin with Claire. They began with the blue sedan. They showed him the old photographs, then the warehouse, then the financial records, then the audio, then the DNA. Finally, they placed Elena's statement in front of him. Mercer read it. He did not look surprised. He looked tired. The detective asked him one question. Did Claire ask you to help her? Mercer stared at the table. Yes. What did you do? He did not answer. Did you help her? Silence. Did you hurt her? Mercer closed his eyes. Then he said, I didn't mean for her to die. The investigators stopped recording for several seconds. It was the first statement approaching a confession. But Mercer immediately added something. She was already in danger. The detective asked who attacked her. Mercer said Hale. The detective asked whether he struck Claire. Mercer said he pushed her. The detective asked why. He said she tried to escape. The detective asked what happened next. Mercer said she fell. He claimed the injury was accidental. He said Hale told him to leave her there. He said he panicked. Then Hale ordered him to help move her. That was the story Mercer gave. But investigators knew there were contradictions. The fracture was severe. The audio suggested violence. Elena heard a loud impact. Mercer's clothing had been damaged. His DNA was found near Claire, and he had concealed the truth for 40 years. Still, prosecutors needed to decide whether his statement was enough. Then Mercer said something that changed the case again. He said the body had not been buried at the Citrus property. Not originally. He claimed Claire had been moved there later. The detectives asked by whom. Mercer named someone. A person no one had yet mentioned. Someone who had remained outside the investigation for 4 decades. A person connected to Hale. A person who had access to the property. and someone whose name appeared on a payment record investigators had not yet examined. The detectives left the interview room immediately. They pulled the financial archive. They searched the name, and there it was. A payment dated October 18th, SIL 1982, the day after Claire disappeared. The description contained only 2 words, final removal. The recipient was alive. And unlike Hale, Kane, and several other people connected to the case, this person had never been questioned. For the first time, investigators realized the cold case might have been missing an entire participant, someone who had not simply helped hide Claire, someone who may have helped move her into the ground. And when detectives found the person's current address, they discovered something even more disturbing. The property was less than 20 miles from the original crime scene. The person had spent 40 years living almost within sight of the place where Claire disappeared, and investigators were now driving there with a warrant.